The rain hammered against the window, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the hum of New York City below. Xavier's heart raced, not from the storm, but from a note he just found slipped under his bedroom door. "I did something last night while you were asleep. I'm sorry. Julian." Xavier's fingers trembled as he reread the words, each one slicing through the haze of his morning grogginess. Julian, his roommate of 6 months, had always been a mystery, charismatic, effortlessly charming, with green eyes that seemed to see straight through him. But this was something else. Something that made Xavier's stomach twist with a mix of dread and curiosity. He sank onto the edge of his bed, the note crumpling in his grip. The apartment was quiet, save for the storm outside and the faint creak of the old hardwood floor. Julian wasn't home. He left for his early shift at the coffee shop down the street. Xavier's mind spiraled, replaying every late-night conversation, every fleeting glance they'd shared over takeout containers and cheap wine. Had he missed something? What could Julian have done? The possibilities sent a shiver down his spine. Not entirely unpleasant. Xavier, 25, had moved to New York from a small town in Oregon, chasing a dream of becoming a graphic novelist. He was all sharp lines and quiet intensity, with dark hair that fell into his eyes when he sketched late into the night. Julian, 26, was his opposite in every way, blonde, bold, a theater major who lit up any room with his quick wit and easy smile. They'd met through a roommate listing on Craigslist, a gamble that had turned into an unexpected friendship. Or so Xavier thought. The note burned in his hand. He stood, pacing the small bedroom, his bare feet cold against the floor. He tried to piece together last night. They watched a movie, some artsy French film Julian had insisted on. Xavier had fallen asleep on the couch, lulled by the wine and Julian's low, soothing voice narrating the plot. He vaguely remembered waking up in his bed, still in his clothes, the blanket tucked around him. Had Julian carried him? The thought made his face flush. He glanced at the clock. 9:47 a.m. Julian wouldn't be back for hours. Xavier's curiosity gnawed at him, urging him to search for answers. He stepped into the living room, the space a chaotic blend of their personalities, Julian's playbills pinned to the wall, Xavier's sketchbooks scattered on the coffee table. His eyes landed on Julian's closed bedroom door. He hesitated. They'd always respected each other's space, an unspoken rule. But the note broke all the rules. Heart pounding, Xavier pushed the door open. Julian's room was tidy, almost too perfect. A neatly made bed, a stack of scripts on the desk, a faint scent of cedarwood cologne lingering in the air. On the nightstand, a leather-bound journal caught Xavier's eye. It was open, a pen resting in the crease, as if Julian had been writing just before he left. Xavier's breath hitched. He shouldn't look. But the note, "I did something last night," echoed in his mind. He picked up the journal, guilt prickling at his conscience. The page was dated yesterday. Julian's handwriting was elegant, almost calligraphic, but the words were raw, unguarded. "I watched him sleep for too long last night." His face was so peaceful, like he was dreaming of something beautiful. "I couldn't help it." I kissed his forehead. "God, what am I doing? He's my roommate." "He's straight." "I'm such an idiot." Xavier's heart stopped. A kiss. Julian had kissed him while he slept. The revelation hit like a tidal wave, stirring emotions he didn't know he'd buried. Shock, yes, but also something warmer, something that made his chest ache. He closed the journal, his hands shaking, and sat on the edge of Julian's bed. The rain outside seemed to fade, replaced by the thunder of his own pulse. He'd always known Julian was gay. Julian had been open about it from the start, sharing stories of past boyfriends with a casual ease that Xavier envied. But Xavier? He'd never questioned his own sexuality. He dated women, flirted with them at bars, lived the life everyone back home expected of him. Yet, sitting here, surrounded by Julian's world, he felt a truth clawing its way to the surface. The sound of the front door opening snapped him back to reality. Xavier, Julian's voice called, laced with nervous energy. He was back early. Panic surged through Xavier. He shoved the journal back onto the nightstand and bolted out of the room, nearly colliding with Julian in the hallway. "Jesus, you scared me," Julian said, his blonde hair damp from the rain, his green eyes wide. He was still in his barista apron, a paper bag of pastries in one hand. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Xavier opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. The note. The journal. The kiss. He wanted to confront Julian, to demand answers, but all he could manage was, "I found your note." Julian's face paled. The bag of pastries slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. "Oh," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Xavier." "I don't." Xavier cut him off, his voice sharper than he intended. He wasn't angry. Not really. But the weight of the moment was suffocating. "Just tell me why." Julian ran a hand through his wet hair, his eyes darting to the floor. "I didn't mean to cross a line. I don't know. You were asleep, and you looked so I don't know." "Xavier, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it." The vulnerability in Julian's voice cracked something open in Xavier. He stepped closer, close enough to smell the coffee and rain on Julian's skin. "You kissed me," he said, not a question but a statement, testing the weight of it. Julian flinched, nodding slowly. "Yeah, I did. I'm sorry." Xavier's heart pounded so loudly he was sure Julian could hear it. He wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between them. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he turned and walked back to his room, the note still clutched in his hand, leaving Julian standing alone in the hallway. As he closed his bedroom door, Xavier leaned against it, his mind racing. That kiss, that fleeting moment in the dark, had changed everything. He wasn't sure what he felt, anger, confusion, or something dangerously close to longing. But one thing was certain, there was no going back. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Xavier stayed in his room, sketching furiously, trying to drown out the chaos in his head. Each stroke of his pencil was an attempt to make sense of Julian's confession. But the lines on the page only grew more jagged, more desperate. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the city glittering under a bruised purple sky. Xavier couldn't avoid Julian forever. They shared this tiny apartment, their lives tangled in ways he hadn't fully grasped until now. He emerged from his room to find Julian in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a focus that seemed forced. The air was thick with unspoken words. Julian glanced up, his green eyes cautious, like he was bracing for a blow. "I made too much stir-fry," he said, his voice light but strained. Want some? Xavier nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. They ate in silence, the clink of forks against plates deafening in the quiet. Finally, Julian broke the tension. Can we talk about it? Or are you just going to pretend I don't exist now? I'm not pretending anything, Xavier said, his voice low. He pushed a piece of broccoli around his plate, avoiding Julian's gaze. I don't know what to say. You kissed me, Julian, while I was asleep. That's not nothing. I know, Julian set his fork down, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. I messed up. I wasn't thinking. I've been feeling things. Okay, things I didn't want to admit, even to myself. And last night, with you asleep, it just happened. Xavier's chest tightened. What kind of things? Julian hesitated, his jaw clenching. You want the truth? I've been falling for you. For months. Every time we talk. Every time you laugh at one of my stupid jokes. It hits me harder. I thought I could keep it under control. But last night he stopped, shaking his head. I'm sorry. I'll move out if you want. The words landed like a punch. Move out. The thought of Julian leaving, of this apartment without his chaotic energy, his late-night rants about theater, his terrible attempts at baking, made Xavier's stomach lurch. No, he said quickly. Don't. I don't want that. Julian's eyes softened, but there was still a guarded edge to them. Then what do you want? Xavier? Because I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. Xavier's mouth went dry. He didn't have an answer, not a clear one. Anyway, all he knew was that Julian's confession had cracked open a door he'd kept locked his entire life. He'd grown up in a town where being anything other than straight was a scandal whispered behind closed doors. He'd never let himself question, never let himself feel. But now, with Julian sitting across from him, raw and honest, Xavier couldn't ignore the pull in his chest. I need time, he said finally, to figure this out. I don't know what I am. Okay, but I don't want you to go. Julian nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his face. Okay, I can give you time. The rest of the meal passed in a tentative truce. They talked about safe things, work, the city, a new art gallery opening downtown. But beneath the surface, the air crackled with something new, something electric. When Xavier went to bed that night, he couldn't stop thinking about Julian's journal, about the way he described watching him sleep. The memory of that kiss, even if he hadn't felt it, lingered like a ghost. The next few days were a delicate dance. Xavier threw himself into his graphic novel, a gritty story about a vigilante in a dystopian city. But now, every character he drew had Julian's sharp cheekbones, his piercing eyes. Julian, meanwhile, was careful around him, keeping his distance but leaving small gestures, a coffee left on the counter, a playlist of Xavier's favorite songs playing softly in the living room. It was maddening, the way Julian's presence filled every corner of Xavier's world. One night, Xavier couldn't sleep. He wandered into the living room at 2 a.m., finding Julian awake, reading one of his scripts under the glow of a lamp. Can't sleep either? Julian asked, his voice soft. Xavier shook his head, sitting on the couch across from him. I keep thinking about what you said. About feeling things. Julian closed his script, his full attention on Xavier. And I don't know, Xavier admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never thought about guys that way. But with you, it's different. I don't know what it means. Julian leaned forward, his eyes searching Xavier's face. It doesn't have to mean anything right now. Just let yourself feel it. Whatever it is, Xavier's heart raced. He wanted to reach out, to close the distance between them, but fear held him back. Instead, he nodded, and they sat in silence, the city humming outside. It wasn't an answer, but it was a start. Weeks passed, and the tension between Xavier and Julian grew, not in conflict, but in something unspoken, fragile, and thrilling. They fell into a rhythm, shared meals, late-night talks, moments where their hands brushed while passing a dish or a book. Each touch sent a jolt through Xavier, awakening parts of himself he'd never explored. He started noticing things, the way Julian's laugh lit up his whole face, the way his fingers lingered on the guitar he sometimes played, the way his voice softened when he said Xavier's name. One evening, Julian invited Xavier to a theater showcase at his university. "It's just a small thing," Julian said, almost shyly. "But I'd love for you to see it." Xavier agreed, curious to see Julian in his element. The auditorium was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. When Julian took the stage, playing a tormented poet in a one-act play, Xavier couldn't look away. Julian was magnetic, his every word dripping with passion. In one scene, his character confessed his love to another man, and the raw emotion in Julian's voice hit Xavier like a freight train. Was that how Julian felt about him? After the show, they walked home through the chilly November streets, their breath visible in the air. "You were incredible," Xavier said, his voice earnest. "I mean it. I couldn't take my eyes off you." Julian grinned, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes. "Thanks. It means a lot. You being there." They stopped at a street corner, the city alive around them, taxis honking, neon signs flickering. Xavier felt the weight of the moment, the urge to say something, to do something. "Julian," he started, his voice trembling. "I've been thinking a lot. About us. About what I feel." Julian's eyes widened, but he stayed silent, letting Xavier find the words. "I'm scared," Xavier admitted. "I've never done this before. I don't even know if I'm like you. But when I'm with you, I feel something. Something real." Julian stepped closer, his voice low. "Xavier, you don't have to have it all figured out. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, they stood there, inches apart, the world fading around them. Then Julian reached out, his fingers brushing Xavier's cheek. It was the lightest touch, but it set Xavier's skin on fire. He leaned into it, closing his eyes, letting himself feel. When he opened his eyes, Julian was watching him, his expression a mix of hope and fear. "Can I kiss you?" Julian whispered. For real this time, Xavier's heart pounded, but he nodded. Julian leaned in, and their lips met, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, more certain. The kiss was electric, a spark that ignited something Xavier hadn't known he was capable of feeling. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Xavier laughed, a shaky, exhilarated sound. "Wow," Julian said, grinning. That was wow. Xavier couldn't stop smiling. "Yeah. Wow." They walked home hand in hand, the city a blur around them. For the first time, Xavier felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. But as they reached their apartment, a nagging fear crept in. What did this mean for them? For him? He'd crossed a line he'd never imagined crossing, and the uncertainty was both thrilling and terrifying. Back in the apartment, they sat on the couch, closer than they'd ever been. Julian traced circles on Xavier's hand, his touch grounding. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so," Xavier said. "It's just a lot. I don't know who I am anymore." Julian squeezed his hand. "You're still you. Just maybe a little more you than before." Xavier laughed, the sound easing the knot in his chest. They stayed up late, talking, kissing, laughing, the world outside forgotten. For one night, it was just them, and it was enough. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Xavier and Julian fell into a new rhythm, one filled with stolen kisses and quiet moments that felt like secrets only they shared. Xavier was still grappling with his identity, but with Julian, it felt less like a crisis and more like a discovery. He started sketching Julian in his graphic novel, not as the vigilante, but as a quiet, soulful figure who brought light to the story's darkness. But the world outside their apartment wasn't as kind. Xavier hadn't told anyone about them, not his friends, not his family back in Oregon. The thought of explaining it, of facing their questions or judgment, made his stomach churn. Julian, on the other hand, was open, proudly introducing Xavier as his boyfriend to his theater friends. The word boyfriend felt heavy, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. One night, they went to a bar with Julian's friends, a lively group of actors and artists. Xavier felt out of place, his quiet demeanor a stark contrast to their boisterous energy. When Julian slipped his arm around Xavier's waist, a few heads turned, and Xavier stiffened. "You okay?" Julian whispered, his breath warm against Xavier's ear. "Yeah, Xavier lit," forcing a smile. But he wasn't okay. The weight of strangers' gazes, the fear of being seen, pressed down on him. He excused himself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. Staring at his reflection, he barely recognized himself. Who was he becoming? When he returned, Julian was waiting outside the bathroom, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" he asked. Xavier hesitated, then spilled it all, the fear, the confusion, the weight of a life he'd never planned for. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "Not out there." "Not yet." Julian's face fell, but he nodded. "I get it. It's a lot. I've had years to figure this out. You've had weeks. I'll wait." But Xavier could see the hurt in Julian's eyes, the fear that he was pulling away. That night, they went home separately, Xavier needing space to think. Alone in his room, he called his older sister, Lena, the one person he trusted with his messiest thoughts. "I'm falling for someone," he told her, his voice shaking. "But it's a guy." Lena was quiet for a moment, then said, "Xavier, does he make you happy?" "Yeah," Xavier said, tears pricking his eyes. "More than I've ever been." "Then that's what matters," she said. "The rest? You'll figure it out." "You always do." Her words stayed with him, a lifeline in the storm. The next morning, he found Julian in the kitchen, looking tired but hopeful. "I'm sorry about last night," Xavier said. "I got scared. But I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." Julian's smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You won't," he said, pulling Xavier into a hug. "We'll figure out together." Christmas loomed, and with it, the inevitability of going home. Xavier hadn't been back to Oregon since moving to New York, and his parents were expecting him. The thought of facing them, of hiding who he was becoming, felt like a betrayal of himself, of Julian. But Julian encouraged him to go. "You don't have to tell them anything," he said. "Just be with your family. I'll be here when you get back." The week in Oregon was torture. Xavier's small town felt smaller, suffocating. His parents asked about his life, his work, but he couldn't bring himself to mention Julian. Every night, he texted Julian, their conversations a lifeline across the miles. "I miss you," Xavier typed one night, the words feeling like a confession. "I miss you too," Julian replied. "Come back soon." When Xavier returned to New York, the apartment felt like home in a way it never had before. Julian was waiting, a goofy grin on his face, a small Christmas tree twinkling in the corner. "Surprise," he said, pulling Xavier into a kiss. They spent the night decorating the tree, laughing and untangling strings of lights. As they sat by the tree, wrapped in a blanket, Xavier felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. "I think I'm ready," he said. "To tell people. To be us." Julian's eyes shone. "You sure?" "Yeah," Xavier said, his voice steady. "I'm sure." The next day, Xavier called his parents. His hands shook as he told them about Julian, about the man who'd changed his life. There was silence on the other end. Then his mom's voice, cautious but kind. "We just want you to be happy, Xavier. Bring him to meet us someday." "Okay." Relief flooded through him. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When he told Julian, they celebrated with cheap champagne and a dance in their living room, the city sparkling outside. Spring brought new challenges. Xavier's graphic novel was picked up by a small publisher, a dream come true that came with long hours and tight deadlines. Julian's theater career was taking off too, with rehearsals keeping him out late. Their time together dwindled, and the distance, though small, felt vast. One night, Xavier came home to find Julian asleep on the couch, a script open on his chest. The sight took Xavier back to that first night. The note, the kiss that started it all. He sat beside Julian, brushing a strand of blonde hair from his face. Julian stirred, blinking up at him. "Hey," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Hey," Xavier said, his heart full. "I love you." Julian's eyes widened, then softened. "I love you too." The words were a promise, a tether. They faced the challenges together, late nights, missed calls, the chaos of chasing dreams in a city that never slowed down. But they carved out moments for each other, moments that reminded them why they'd taken this leap. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, hand in hand, Xavier realized how far he'd come. From a note slipped under his door to a love he'd never expected. His life had changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. The world wasn't always kind, but with Julian by his side, he felt ready to face it. As they sat on a bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Julian leaned his head on Xavier's shoulder. "You know," he said, "that night I kissed you while you were asleep, I thought I'd ruined everything. But it was the best mistake I ever made." Xavier laughed, pulling him closer. It changed everything. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And in a city of millions, in a world full of noise, they found something rare, a love worth fighting for, a home in each other.